spiritual energy kept stirring and converging violently within his spiritual sea. Not long after, the huge amount of spiritual energy gradually gathered together and, to his surprise, formed an unstable vortex of spiritual energy within his spiritual sea. As soon as the vortex had taken its initial shape, the scattered, roaming spiritual energy seemed to have found a vent. Huff. 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 Thread after thread of misty spiritual energy rushed forth and merged into the vortex of spiritual energy from every direction. After the misty spiritual energy finished gathering, the spiritual vortex that had just formed, and was still unstable, began to revolve even faster and more furiously. A gravitational force was suddenly born from the center of the vortex. In that moment, Nietian suddenly felt that the speed at which his spiritual sea was absorbing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth had suddenly increased by many times. Before, he needed to continuously channel energy with the chi refining incantation, so as to gradually pull the spiritual energy from the outside into his spiritual sea. However, now that the vortex of spiritual power was formed within his spiritual sea, everything had changed. The revolution of the spiritual vortex gave rise to a gravitational force, which, coupled with the chi refining incantation, would allow Nietian to absorb the surrounding spiritual chi of heaven and earth at a speed several times faster than before. He experimented by stopping his use of the chi refining incantation. Yet, he found to his surprise that the vortex of spiritual power within his spiritual sea was still revolving. The downside was that, without his guidance and the effect of the chi refining incantation, the speed of revolution slowed down by several-fold. But even so, the vortex of spiritual power in his spiritual sea was still slowly taking in the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. This made him realize that in the future, even without practicing chi refining incantation, his spiritual sea would still unceasingly absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth because of the existence of the vortex. No matter if he was eating, sleeping, or fighting, as long as his vortex of spiritual power didn't stop revolving, he would be able to gather and store up spiritual chi of heaven and earth non-stop. At that moment, having felt the changes himself, he seemed to come to an enlightenment without